So I had an interaction with a student of mine, and she was telling me that the past year has been very, very traumatic for her. She had a total financial meltdown, she had a health meltdown, various other breakdowns, and so she concluded that the year was very challenging for her. But in passing, she mentioned that, we used to work on her back in yoga classes, and she had this back problem for decades. It would come and go, but no permanent solution. But she's saying this year, somehow there's been no backache. And I can't help thinking that maybe whatever she went through gave her a healing in a way that her back got, we don't know, this is conjecture. But when things go wrong, we feel life's hitting us with things we don't want, that it's out of control. But who knows, by the logic of the infinite, as Sri Aurobindo would say, what's being worked out through all the hardships and struggles that we go through. For example, if our car gets hit, we think it's random, but who knows? Maybe there were bigger forces targeting us and they got spent in just hitting the car, or they would have. What I'm trying to say is, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. So we look at appearances and say, this is good, this is bad, we've been hit by it. But really everything in life is happening for us, it's not happening to us. We feel life will just randomly do anything to us anytime and we have to bear it, and that's the source of our anxiety, right? That how will I deal with it if life hits me with this or life hits me with that? But really life never hits us with anything. It's not random. And even if life gives us pain, it never gives us more pain than what's good for our growth. And it takes us through the journey of pain as nurturingly as possible. So there's an intricate planning to everything that happens in life. It's, those famous lines we come back to again and again. Savitri, life is not made up of random bricks of chance. A blind God is not destiny's architect. A conscious power has drawn the plan of life. A conscious power, and life is not just a happening, it's a plan. A conscious power has drawn the plan of life, and there's a meaning in every curve and line. So if we really remember this, we can't be anxious. No, we get anxious when we forget this truth. When we move away from the remembrance that life is happening for us, and we get caught in the conditioning that life is happening to us. So if you look at the PDF, the second page, Savitri, page 76, a brighter, heavenlier sun must soon illume this dusk room with its dark internal stare. This dusk room is the metaphor for our ignorance. Okay, so this dark room, which is our ignorance, a brighter, heavenlier sun must illume, must bring light to, a higher wisdom must bring light to our ignorance. The infant soul in its small nursery school, mid objects meant for a lesson hardly learned, outgrow its early grammar of intellect and its imitation of earth nature's art. So, as we go to school, we learn basic grammar. Then as we go to a higher class, we learn more advanced grammar. So the teachings of life here is like a grammar. So it says that the infant soul in its small nursery school. Infant is not chronological infant. When we are spiritual infants, we in our small nursery school, mid objects meant for a lesson hardly learned. We haven't learned the lessons of life. Outgrow its early grammar of intellect. When we are in our infancy of spirituality, we go by intellect, and intellect will look at things and say, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. But at some point, when this brighter, heavenlier sun illumines us, then we outgrow our early grammar of intellect, an imitation of earth's nature's art. Its earthly dialect. Dialect is the language spoken. So we are now speaking our earthly language to God language change, to understand and think in terms of God language rather than human language. In living symbols, study reality and learn the logic of the infinite. So this is the logic of the infinite, one part of it, that life always works for me by a logic that, for example, the story I started with, by the logic of the infinite, this girl had to go through all that to remove things which would heal her back. But to our vision, we can't see all this working. So we'll say, oh, it's an unfortunate year, it's a challenging year. That's the intellectual, spiritual infancy. That's the earlier grammar which we have to outgrow when the higher light comes in. Okay? Now, when we really live with this knowing that every moment life works, let's actually try this. Shut your eyes and actually allow yourself to think of something that you feel is unfortunate and see it in the light of what I've just said. Like that girl, life always works for me. It doesn't happen to me, it works for me. This too is part of life's working for me. never against me, never randomly to me, but at every moment for me. Slowly open your eyes. Whenever you're ready. Does it make you feel a little lighter to see it in this perspective? It does, it does. So as they say, happiness is only a perspective. Now this is a very old story and all of you know it, but merit in bringing it up here. You know, there's that story that a man was walking on the beach and he saw two pairs of footprints, one his and one the footprints of God walking behind him. And during his difficulties, he sees only one set of footprints and he feels abandoned by God, that in my most trying times, why did you leave me? So God says, I never left you. In your trying times, you were too weak to walk. So I carried you and the footprints you saw were my footprints. But actually, this is so true. In difficult time, we don't see God's footprints because we are too busy looking at our difficulty. But Mother says that during difficult times, even more grace is with you than during regular times. But we just don't know it. So during difficult times, instead of just sitting back, trusting grace and allowing us to set ourselves to be carried, we keep mourning the difficulty, we keep trying to solve it, feel frustrated if we don't find a solution. So instead of all that, if we just had faith and we reminded ourselves, it's looking like just now life is happening to me, but it never happens to me. It always and always happens for me. Then that can bring such a completion to me that all the energy that I'm sort of imprisoning in the bid to survive is freed up to give. Why are we so stingy in giving to the world? Because we are too caught up with our own survival, isn't it? Simple things like somebody needs my phone call, but I don't have time, I'll do it tomorrow. Or whatever, I'm so busy looking after myself because I'm not assured of my survival that I don't have energy to really give. But when I'm completely assured of my survival and in fact the fact that I'm so looked after, then I experience the joy of giving. And there's a beautiful story here, I'll read it to you. It's called The King's Highway. First page. Once upon a time, a king had a great highway built for the people who lived in his kingdom. After it was completed, but before it was open to the public, the king decided to have a contest. He invited as many of his subjects as desired to participate. The challenge was to see who could travel the highway the best. The winner was to receive a box of gold. On the day of the contest, all the people came. Some of them had fine chariots. Some had fine clothing and fancy food to make the trip a luxurious journey. Some wore their sturdiest shoes and ran along the highway on their feet to show their skill. All day they traveled the highway, and each one, when he arrived at the end, complained to the king about a large pile of rocks and debris that had been left almost blocking the road at one point, and that got in their way and hindered their travel. At the end of the day, a lone traveler crossed the finish line warily and walked over to the king. He was tired and dirty, but he addressed the king with great respect and handed him a small chest of gold. He said, I stopped along the way to clear a pile of rocks and debris that was blocking the road. This chest of gold was under it all. Please have it returned to its rightful owner." The king replied, "You are the rightful owner." "Oh no," said the traveler, "this is not mine. I have never known such money." "Oh yes," said the king, "you've earned this gold, for you won my contest. He who travels the road best, is he who makes the road better for those who will follow." Remember these words of wisdom as you travel the road of life. So, of course, the whole story is a metaphor. The king is the divine. The road we are invited to walk the best is our life. And the one who makes the road better for others is the one who travels the road the best. We think that if we travel the most beautifully with beautiful clothes, with fancy shoes, with chariots, if we go fast, we are traveling the road well. But such a beautiful story that he who clears the road and makes even one life breathe better for it, that's the one who's traveling the road of the best in the eyes of God. So what really stops us from all of us have experienced this, that when we really give anything, not from a space of wanting appreciation or whatever, but when we spontaneously give, it truly makes us happy, right? Mother has said it so many times that the joy you get in giving is far more than the joy you get in receiving. So there was this beautiful story. We did this in our morning yoga class today. So one definition of hell is that there's a place where people have no elbow joint. So their hands are like this. So if they have to put food in their mouth, there's no way food can reach their mouth, because their fingers, whatever they do, it can't reach their mouth. So they have to starve, and that is hell, till one person suddenly gets an idea that why don't I feed you and you feed me? Our hands can reach each other's mouth. So when they fed each other, the hell became heaven. So that is what this is all about. So long as I'm trapped in my ego sense, my sense of I, which really wants to absorb the whole universe into myself. What is the ego? The urge to be seen. At a very base level, ego is the urge to be seen. And ego is the urge to be appreciated. Ego is the urge to pull the universe into myself. And although I think that's making me happy, it's actually making me feel very incomplete and unhappy most of the times. But every time I forget myself and I do something for somebody else, in that one moment, the ego loses its hold. And wherever the ego loses its hold, there's the joy of the self which comes forward. The real self, the capital S self, is always there at the background, but it's covered up by my sense of I. So wherever the ego drops, even momentarily, the joy of the self comes forward. That's why Mother says there's infinitely more joy in giving than in receiving, and we've all tasted that. So, Sri Aurobindo says, ego is that, or it's the mother. The ego is what helps us to individualize ourselves and what prevents us from becoming divine. The ego is what helps us to individualize ourselves. So, feel separate from another, that's individualize ourselves. But it prevents us from becoming divine. It prevents us from knowing the truth of our higher self. What you have to do is to shift the objective of desire. Instead of turning towards things that are external, artificial, superficial, and egoistical, you must join it as a force of realization to the aspiration directed to the truth. So it's like, suppose I want one of the main life springs of the ego is desire, right? It survives on desire. I want this, I want that. If I get that, I'm happy. If I don't get that, I'm unhappy. So Sri Aurobindo says, don't kill desire, but change the object of desire. So, like we've said, always remind yourself, but I want the mother more. So suppose I'm really hankering after something, remind yourself, but I want the peace I've experienced at times more. I want the aspiration that makes me happy more, right? So change the object of your desire. When one aspires for something, so to change the object of the desire, you have to kindle your aspiration, right? So this passage is on aspiration. When one aspires for something, if at the same time one knows that the aspiration will be heard and answered in the best way possible, that establishes a quietude in the being, a quietude in its vibrations, whilst if there is a doubt and uncertainty, if one does not know what will lead one to the goal, or if ever one will reach it, or whether there is a way of doing so and so on, then one gets disturbed, and that usually creates a sort of little whirlwind around the being, which prevents it from receiving the real thing. Instead, if one has a quiet faith, if whilst aspiring one knows that there is no aspiration, naturally sincere aspiration which remains unanswered, so beautiful. When mother says it, it has to be true, right? She's saying if while aspiring one knows that there is no aspiration, sincere aspiration which remains unanswered, then one is quiet. When we pray or aspire, it's often with, yeah, I'm saying it, but will she really hear it? But she's saying if you know, and I'm telling you that every sincere prayer is heard, she's told us that. So if you aspire out of that space, if one has quiet faith, if while aspiring one knows that there is no aspiration which remains unanswered, then one is quiet. One aspires with as much fervor as possible, but does not stand in nervous agitation asking oneself why one does not get immediately what one has asked for. One knows how to wait. When will we know how to wait? When we know that every aspiration is heard. If I feel if a child knows that the mother has heard what it's want, it will keep quiet. But if it feels the mother's doing other things and hasn't really, she'll keep tugging the mother's skirt or whatever and saying, I want this, I want this. But if we are assured that I have to just say it once, she's heard and she'll do it in her own time, then we can wait with patience. I have said somewhere to know how to wait is to put time on one's side. That is quite true. For if one gets excited, one loses all one's time. One loses one's time, loses one's energy, loses one's movements. To be very quiet, calm, peaceful, with the faith that what is true will take place, and that if one lets it happen, it will happen so much the quicker. Then in that peace, everything goes much better. Rajul, would you like to share or you'd rather not? Sure. Okay. Psychological addictions and aspiration. Just the way pleasure and ananda cannot coexist. Mother says that, that the vibration of pleasure and ananda can't coexist. We know the difference, no? Ananda is the joy we feel like at the samadhi or when we are connected to the mother. Pleasure is, suppose somebody flatters you, things go well, that's pleasure. And mother says these two are such contradictory vibrations that they can't coexist. Just the way light and darkness can't coexist in one room.
What about the physical pleasure, the joy of eating something
But that's pleasure. That's different from the Ananda you.
I understand.
Yeah.
But it's different from the other pleasure also.
No, it's pleasure is pleasure. It can be sensorial pleasure, mental pleasure, emotional pleasure.
When is joy felt?
Depends what you define joy to be. If for you joy is Ananda, but truly joy is Ananda. Pleasure is not really joy. But if you don't know what Ananda is, then for you pleasure is joy. So just the way pleasure and Ananda cannot coexist, craving and aspiration too cannot coexist. Craving and aspiration cannot coexist. There is a line from the film What the Bleep Do We Know, which says, we start living when we love the abstract more than our addictions. It's a very beautiful line. What are our addictions? We are not just talking about alcohol and tea addiction. We are talking about our emotional addictions. What are our emotional addictions? Attachments, emotions we are addicted to. An emotion you can't control is an emotion you're addicted to. Anger can be an emotional addiction. So when we are caught with our emotional addictions, they become all important, and abstract is the beyond the divine. So life begins when we love the abstract more than our emotional addictions. But we can't say that we actually do. In the moment we are caught up in our emotional addictions, there's no room to even think of mother. She's somewhere in the background, but we are too imprisoned by that. So that's what the line is saying. We are addicted to our feelings of needing to be praised, craving for a particular person's attention, etc. When this addiction occupies the center stage of our consciousness, our love for the abstract, our aspiration is dimmed, isn't it? In that moment, a choice exists whether to give in to the futile addiction or to reach out for the truth. In those moments, the mantra Anandmayi, Chaitanyamayi, Satyamayi, Parame starts. Anandmayi brings the aspiration for the unconditional bliss that frees me from hankering after the dream pleasures of psychological addictions. Yeah, it reminds me, move away from pleasure, come to joy. I'm hankering for this person's attention because I think that will give me pleasure. But even if I get that pleasure, it will be far inferior to the joy I'll feel when I'm connecting to Mother. Chaitanyamayi brings a thirst for the consciousness that sees the whole beyond the distorted bits seen by the mind. Chaitanyamayi is consciousness. So a thirst, I'm seeing only a bit, give me the vision of the whole. So that line, wherever there's ignorance, there suffering too must come. So give me the Chaitanya, the consciousness that's the remedy to that particular ignorance, so that when I see the whole, when I see it like a simple thing we did just now, just that sentence, life works for me, not to me. In a way, it's bringing consciousness to the dark moment, right? I'm seeing the larger context. So with Chaitanyamayi, I'm praying for that. A thirst for the consciousness that sees the whole beyond the distorted bits seen by the mind. Satyamayi is an aspiration for the truth consciousness to descend beyond the lies of appearances. Appearances are lying to us all the time, right? But Satyamayi is a prayer for the truth consciousness to descend. With Parame, an aspiration arises for a consciousness of transcendence to descend, for that which is beyond time and space, and so is beyond the sting of any event or interaction. So Parame means take me to that part. We did some Savitri classes, Sarvanubhu, right? That the self, which is the real receiver of all experiences, but remains untouched by any experience. Like if you throw color into the sky can't be stained. So the real me is that which is always untouched by any experience. So Parame is a cry for that transcendence. So each word can strengthen my aspiration. Anandmayi can make me think that move away from hankering after pleasure to joy, Ananda. Chaitanyamayi, give me the wisdom perspective, the perspective of the whole that widens me, because there's that saying, no, Yovai Bhuma, that which is vast, that's Sukham, that is happy. Nalpe Sukham Asti, Alpa is small. In the small, there's no joy. If I'm unhappy, I'm being small about something. Give me the Chaitanya to widen so that I can be happy. Then Satyamayi, let me see the truth that sets me free of the unhappiness of the moment. And Parame, take me to the transcendence, that part of me which is never touched by the pain that the surface path goes through. Yeah, so each word is so powerful. Mother's words. There is only one single solution to the problem, not to make any distinction between God and the universe at the origin. The universe is the divine projected in space, and God is the universe at its origin. So both are God. The universe is God projected into space, and God is the universe at its origin. So the universe and God are one. It is the same thing under one aspect or another, and you cannot divide them. It is the opposite conception to that of the Creator and His work. Mother never used to like the term Creator and His creation. She used to always say Creator and His becoming, because God became creation. Only it is very convenient to speak of the Creator and His work. It makes explanations very easy and the teaching quite elementary. But it is not the truth. And then you say, how is it that God, who is all powerful, has allowed the world to be like this? But it is your own conception. It is because you yourself happen to be in the midst of a set of circumstances that seems to you unpleasant. So you project that upon the divine and you tell him, why have you made such a world? Open quotes, I did not make it, God would reply. It is you yourself. And it is you, and if you become myself once again, you will no longer feel as you do. What makes you feel as you do is that you are no longer myself. In your perception, you are no longer myself. Actually, you're still me. That is what he could tell you in an answer. And the fact is that when you succeed in uniting your consciousness with the divine consciousness, there is no problem left. Everything appears quite natural and simple and all right and exactly what it had to be. The mother further says, the first point is not to place yourself in thought, feeling or action at the center of the universe, so that it exists only in terms of oneself. One is a part of the universe, one can unite with it, but the Supreme Lord alone is its center because He surpasses and contains it. So, if you take 10 thoughts you have, how many of them would you say are about you and your day-to-day survival, and how many of them are about the Mother or the Divine? Be honest. 90% are about I, me, myself, and that too, she must be quite advanced to say that truly. If we are really honest, except when we are meditating, praying, whatever, when we are involved in activity, work, whatever, we are, Mother is very much in the background because we are controlled by the ego, right? We are thinking of ourselves, what will be my outcome, what will I get out of it, blah, blah, blah. So it's a totally egocentric existence. And Sri Aurobindo says it so beautifully that whole of yoga is the transition from an ego-centered existence to a God-centered existence. when every activity revolves around God and not myself. And that's a long journey.
What do you mean by revolve?
Everything is genuinely done for God, not for myself, without any self-look.
By or
For God. So, and Rama, we have to be starkly honest with ourselves. We've read so much, we say, I to do everything for the mother, but it's not true. You have to be very, not you, I'm saying
I asked you for or by?
for. Of course, by, so she's only doing. She's doing everything. But am I consciously doing it for her? Generally, no. I'm doing it for my ego. And because I'm doing it for my ego, I'm in hell. I have that arm that can never be flexible enough to feed me, and I remain hungry and incomplete. But if both my arms are giving and giving and giving, and God is the universe, right? When I offer to Bijal, if I have the feeling that I'm offering to mother in Bijal, or to mother in Nash, or mother in Komal, the whole feeling becomes so different, right? But I don't remember that. Very often, if I'm presenting, if I'm cooking, if I'm teaching, I'm doing it, oh, I hope they like what I cook, or I hope I teach well and I'm appreciated as a teacher, then I'm not doing it for the mother. But if I'm really doing it as mother, this is you, this is your universe. The person who's going to eat is you, I'm making it for you. Or the children I'm teaching are bits of you, let me offer to them. The whole ball game changes, but we have to work a lot to even bring that thought into the foreground at every moment. Or if I'm in Indian culture, it's so beautiful, no? And in villages, if a guest comes, it's ingrained in them to say Narayan Aaye hai. You know, they say that Krishna has come, and they mean it. They don't, but we've moved so far away from our culture that we feel everything as separate from God, and that is our hell. And that's why the Sri Aurobindo says, and Mother says, that in yoga, if somebody asks Mother, what's the most important point in our yoga to remember constantly? She said it's to remember that all is God and all is in God. But we keep forgetting that. And that's why we are trapped in our ego. So, the mother says, the first point is not to place oneself in thought, feeling or action at the center of the universe so that it exists only in terms of oneself. One is part of the universe. One can unite with it. But the Supreme Lord alone is its center because He surpasses and contains it. The first thing one learns on the way is the joy of giving is far greater than the joy of taking. Then gradually one learns that to forget oneself is the source of immutable peace. When you do something for somebody else, for that moment you've forgotten yourself. And that forgetting yourself is a source of immutable peace, isn't it? Are you understanding what I'm saying? Later on, in this self-forgetfulness, one finds the divine. And that is a source of ever-increasing bliss. There's that beautiful story of Radha and Krishna. I think I've said it many Savitri classes ago. Now, Radha was in a constant state of self-giving to Krishna. She didn't remember herself. She only remembered Krishna. So, all the gopis were getting very jealous of Krishna's love for Radha, and they complained that we also love you. Why are you so partial to Radha? So, Krishna didn't answer them, and next time he met them, he came and he was crying in pain, and he said, oh my God, I have this terrible headache. And all the gopis said, tell us what we can do for you. Said, my headache will only go if I lie down and one of you puts your foot on my forehead. So all the gopis says, Lord, we can't do that. It's such bad karma and we'll get so much pap if we do that. And then Radha comes. And they said, this is what Krishna is saying and we are in a dilemma. So Radha said, What's the dilemma? My Krishna is in pain. It's important that his pain goes away. I don't care about my karma. And she said, lie down. And she put her foot on his head. And Krishna smiled at all the gopis, and they understood that, yeah, the way Radha loves Krishna, none of us love him. So it's obvious that he will have that special place for her. So if we keep thinking about ourselves, our pain, our this, our that, then we have that much less space in our consciousness to think of God and to give to God in bits of God which are the universe. Yeah?
So, Mother has said that the purpose of life is not happiness.
Is not?
It's not happiness, it's either beauty or it's the divine.
Purvi, no. We should quote her exact words. So this is not her exact words. The sense of it was that the purpose of the divine for you is not to give you immediate happiness as you understand happiness. His purpose for you is to grow in consciousness so that you have the ultimate immutable Ananda, not the small Ananda that you're reaching out for moment to moment. Not instant gratification, but to give you a consciousness that is self-generated joy. So you're not dependent on things to give you joy. Each time an individual breaks the narrow limitations in which he is imprisoned by his ego and emerges into the open air through self-giving, whether for the sake of another human being or his family, his country or his faith, he finds in this self-forgetfulness a foretaste of the marvelous delight of love. And this gives him the impression that he has come into contact with the divine. It's beautiful, huh? Mother saying that every time we break a narrow limitation through self-giving, whether for the sake of another family or his or a human being or his country, he forgets himself. You do something for anyone in your family, for that moment you forget yourself. You're not calculating what will I get out of it, whatever. And this, she says, is a foretaste of the marvelous delight of love. And this gives him the impression that he has come into contact with the divine. But most often, it is only a fleeting contact. For in the human being, love is immediately mixed with lower egoistic movements. You did it, you felt very happy. But next day, if the person doesn't respond to you the way you'd like, you'll think, I did so much for him, he can't even do this much for me. So the beauty of that moment is lost. Immediately mixed with lower egoistic movements which debase it and rob it of its power of purity. The true nirvana is the disappearance of the ego into the splendor of the Supreme. And this way is what I call the positive way, the self-giving that is integral, total, perfect, without reserve, without bargaining. In the mere fact of not thinking of oneself, not existing for oneself, referring nothing to oneself, thinking only of what is supremely beautiful, luminous, delightful, powerful, compassionate and infinite, there is such a profound delight that nothing can be compared to it. What is she talking about? In what is there such a profound delight that nothing can be compared to it? What is she talking about? Self-giving. She's talking about self-giving, which can't really happen without self-forgetfulness. Because if you remember yourself constantly, you have so much less to give, no? You are really in the sanctum sanctorum of your heart. You have displaced mother, no? In a way, you're seated there. Your whole life is self-worship. Not means you may dislike yourself also, but everything is about I, me, my, me, and that's tiring. In a way, mother says people who get depressed easily are people who are very egoistic, because they think so much about themselves that they are all the time feeling incomplete and a lack. But if you forget yourself and you really think of God with gratitude, you remember that everyone is God and make a conscious effort to see God in everyone. You can't do that if you're constantly remembering yourself. And it's not easy to forget yourself, because it's such a conditioning to constantly remember yourself also. But egoistic self-love is actually not self-love. I'm talking about self-regard, not self-love. Self-love is beautiful, but what ego constant reference to the self is what mother calls self-regard. All the time looking at me, how did I look, how did I do? All the time preening to my eyes or the eyes of others, or the opposite, I'm no good. All the time thinking I'm no good is also self-regard. Or thinking I'm too good is also self-regard.
But you are also God, right? Like in you also there is.
Of course there is God, but when you look at the I, you're looking at the illusion of God in you. You're not looking at your real God self. The I doesn't exist, right? We've discussed it many times. It's a mental construct. It's just a bundle of thoughts which you think you are. But you are not what you think you are. There's that line, no, in Peaceful Warrior, your thoughts don't tell you any more about yourself than the freckle on your nose. You look at the freckle on your nose and try to discover yourself through it. To know yourself through your thoughts is as futile as that. So your ego is your self-definition through your thoughts, but you are not that. You are something much more than that. So to fall in love with your non-existent self and disregard the real magic that you are, that's not self-love, that's just self-regard. All atheists will be? But you know, Purvi, I say this many times. One sec. Carl Jung, you know, he's the father of Western psychology. He's supposed to have said that of all the people who came to me, which is mentally ill people, not even one believed. So I think faith is so healing. If you have faith, you can go through the toughest periods and something will hold you. If you are an atheist, what do you hold on to? It must be, then you have to be vitally very strong, which some of them are. But under real pressure, even that cracks. And then they suddenly turn towards faith and whatever.
I'm not too sure what she means by self-giving.
Self-giving is an urge to, okay, if you really love someone, and say when we were younger and we've courted, we've all had that feeling, no? Whatever we do, at the background that person is in our thought. If we see a movie, we'll think, oh, I must bring that person to the movie, the person will enjoy it. If I eat something good, I think of that person. Everything is referred to that one person. But that's a human being. Imagine if it becomes God. That everything I do, I'm thinking, how will this serve mother? How can this be offered to mother? Then I move into self-giving. We are all very far from it. We are in good company, but it's a good ideal to keep before us and work towards. Man has a right to beatitude, since that is what he was created for. But any egocentric movement is the very opposite of this beatitude. I think if I preen, I'll have beatitude, I'll have happiness. But Mother is saying any egocentric movement is the opposite of this beatitude. Why? Can anyone tell me why is it the opposite?
Narrowing.
Why is it narrowing, Nash?
Because it's self, if you're thinking of only yourself, you're narrow, you're caught within yourself. You're thinking of the divine.
Loud.
When you're thinking of the divine, you're open to everything else outside. It's like the divine encompasses everything.
Yeah.
You come in touch with something which is deeper, bigger, vaster, complete in its experience. But when you're connected to only that which you call your I or yourself, you are narrow enough. You're so narrow that you cannot be open to anything else. So
Right.
the attitude itself is grand. It's big. It's vast. It's freeing. It's
Right. And you become very narrow even if you get the limelight and the praise and whatever. For many of us, we become possessive about it. We don't like others getting it. It narrows us, and in anything small, there's no joy. Nalpe sukham asti.
It's like being in a closed room with all the doors and windows shut, and then you feel you're happy but you can't breathe.
Yeah, very well put, Bijal. She's saying when you seek that egoistic beatitude, it's like you're in a room with all doors and windows shut. You feel you can't breathe. You have to live up to an image. You have to possess. You have to compete. It's not a happy place to be in.
Also, you feel disconnected.
You feel disconnected. The more the ego comes to the front, the more the self retreats. It's always a fact. The more your ego comes forward, the more your real self will go into the background. By self-forgetfulness, by self-giving, man has a right to beatitude since that is what he has been created for. But any egocentric movement is the very opposite of this beatitude. So that if you seek it for yourself alone, you repel it instead of attracting it. By self-forgetfulness, by self-giving without asking anything in return, by merging, so to say, into this beatitude so that it may shine upon all, you find the inner peace and joy which never leave you. By self-forgetfulness, by self-giving without asking anything in return, by merging, so to say, into this beatitude so that it may shine upon all, you find this inner peace and joy which never leave you. What is the difference between self-forgetfulness and self-giving? Somebody asks Mother. Mother replies, self-forgetfulness may simply be a passive state resulting from a total lack of egoism. I'm not egoistic, I'm just quiet. Self-giving, which takes its full value when it is directed towards the divine, is an active movement. So self-forgetfulness is the background on which self-giving happens. I have to first forget myself in order to really give myself. Self-giving, which takes its full value when it is directed towards the divine, is an active movement which includes love in its purest and highest form. A total self-giving to the divine is the true purpose of existence. So beautiful in one line. A total self-giving to the divine is the true purpose of existence. This is a piece called The Giver and the Receiver. More than anything, these are Pamela Bloom's words, a practicing Buddhist, very beautiful words. More than anything, compassion as taught by the Buddha is not about a giver and a receiver, an I and another. In fact, the various Buddhist meditation practices taught to develop compassion are all focused on the dissolution of the abyss between that which gives and that which receives. That is to say, the dissolution of the perception of that abyss. No me, no you. Only a sea of sentient beings suffering for endless eons, all looking for a way out. So she said a very beautiful thing. Compassion is not about a giver and a receiver. I feel I'm compassionate to you when I'm giving you. But compassion is about dissolution of the abyss between that which gives and that which receives. What do you understand by this? Compassion is dissolving the abyss between the giver and the receiver. What does that mean?
It's because if there is a feeling that I am giving and then there is a feeling of I am receiving, one is elevated, one is feeling below, underneath the person. The moment that dissolution happens, there is no giving it, it's a flow, it's a free flow. Like you're doing it, it's like I'm scratching my own leg. I will
Very
not feel
good.
a giver or receiver in that.
Very good. So the Buddhist masters whose hearts are of compassion, for what does nirvana mean? Extinguished. At every point in their consciousness, the sense of I is gone. So they just feel completely one with the whole universe. So when they give to somebody, there's no sense of I'm giving. It's just a flow. There's no self-righteous thought, there's no superiority, there's a total dissolution of the abyss. I'm treating you as I treat myself. No me, no you, only a sea of sentient beings suffering for endless eons, all looking for a way out. The Buddha says the way out, the cure and the antidote, the medicine and the balm lies deep within us, in the very nature of who we are. At the core, listen to this sentence very carefully, at the core of our misery, the Buddha said, it is our self-centeredness, our clinging to a solid frozen self that we imagine to be permanent. At the core of all our suffering is our selfishness, our self-regard, our clinging to a solid frozen self. We think the self is frozen, but the self keeps changing. Remember our 2 times Bhakka Savitri class on impermanence. No, all phenomena of mind and matter are empty of a permanent, constant self, the Buddha says. So the I that I'm so attached to doesn't even exist. Further, whatever the apparent appearance, the cause of our suffering is only one: ignorance of the truth and consequent buying into the appearance of falsehood, of separation. All suffering arises out of the solid frozen self that Pamela Bloom speaks of, being threatened. All suffering arises out of that, in quotes, solid frozen self that Pamela Bloom speaks of, feeling threatened. When I feel threatened, I suffer. When we experience that there is no self, in that concept we touch the real self, the S with a capital L, S. When we experience there is no self, S with a small s, that is, there is no, the ego sense doesn't exist, we touch the real self. The sea of sentient beings suffering for endless eons, looking for a way out. We become the sea that brims with compassion for each wave, knowing each wave to be ourself. Clear? In order to know this, we have to silence the thinking mind, which lodges the concept of the solid frozen self. Ramana Maharishi said, no, the first thought is the I thought. So long as you think, thoughts will keep generating a sense of I. But when your thoughts slow down, your sense of I also becomes thin. In ensuing silence, the true self reveals itself.
Okay, so when you keep thinking of God, that's a thought.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's when
But it's a higher thought than thinking of yourself. It's not the goal, but it's a path on the way to the goal. When the ego gets flattered by, oh, A loves me so much, it is good to remember that A loves the one, capital O, one in me, because the because the one, because not the, because, so the is a printing error, because no separate me exists that can be loved. Okay, the just cancel it, because no separate me exists that can be loved. So also when the ego shrinks because B dislikes me, it is good to remember that there is no me to be disliked. Do you get that? If I don't exist, there's no me that can be liked, there's no me that can be disliked. Also the dislike like the non-existent me is not real, because the very substance of the one is love. Veiled behind every dislike is the substrate of love, the cosmic laughter that sustains the Leela. It's a beautiful sentence. Veiled behind every dislike is the substrate of love, the cosmic laughter that sustains the Leela. We did this last class, no? That I feel, supposing a person is mean to me and I attribute it to the ill intent of A. But actually the God intelligence which loves me unconditionally is acting through A to bring out things that are within me. We discussed this at length last class. So behind every dislike is the substrate of love, the cosmic laughter that sustains the Leela. The shadow in the giving or doing a good turn arises when the sense of an I, who is the giver, being different from the one who receives. As Pamela Bloom says, true compassion arises in the dissolution of the perception of the abyss between that which gives and that which receives. If compassion becomes a simple flow of goodness from self with a capital S to self with a capital S, then the shadow ceases to be. Oh, this is a beautiful thing, and we'll end with this. Very practical what Mother tells us. If you want to do something well, whatever it may be, any kind of work, the least thing, play a game, write a book, do painting or music, or run a race, anything at all. If you want to do it well, you must become what you are doing and not remain a small person looking at himself doing it. When we are doing something, we are always looking at ourselves, no, am I doing it right? How will this look? How will that look? So Mother says you must become what you are doing and not remain a small person looking at himself doing it. For if one looks at oneself acting, one is still in complicity with the ego. If in oneself one succeeds in becoming what one does, it is a great progress to become what you are doing. In the least little details, one must learn this. Take a very amusing instance. You want to fill a bottle from another bottle. You concentrate. You may try it as a discipline, as a gymnastic. Well, as long as you are the bottle to be filled, the bottle from which one pours, the movement of pouring, as long as you are only this, all goes well. But if unfortunately you think at a given moment, it's getting on well, I'm managing well, the next minute it spills over. Have you found that? It is the same for everything, That is why work is a good means of discipline. For if you want to do the work properly, you must become the work instead of being someone who works. Otherwise, you will never do it well. If you remain someone who works, and besides if your thoughts go vagabonding, then you may be sure that if you are handling fragile things, they will break. If you are cooking, you will burn something, or if you are playing a game, you will miss all the balls. It is here in this that work is a great discipline. For if truly you want to do it well, this is the only way of doing it, becoming one with it. Take someone who is writing a book, for instance. If he looks at himself writing the book, you can imagine how dull the book will become. It smells immediately of the small human personality which is there, and it loses all value. Now when you read a book, sometimes you get a sense there's too much of the I in the writer. Nah? Even if it's very beautiful words, you don't like to read it. We've all experienced writing like that. Immediately of the small human personality which is there, and it loses all its value. When a painter paints a picture, if he observes himself painting the picture will never be good. Any work we do with constant self-regard, it will always get compromised. It will always be a kind of projection of the painter's personality. It will be without life, without force, without beauty. But if all of a sudden he becomes the thing he wants to express, if he becomes the brushes, the paintings, the canvas, the subject, the image, the colors, the value, the whole thing, and is entirely inside it and lives it, he will make it something magnificent. So true humility consists in constantly referring oneself to the Lord, in placing all before Him. Mother saying this, when I receive a blow, and there are quite a few of them in my sadhana, my immediate spontaneous reaction like a spring is to throw myself before Him and to say, Thou Lord. Without this humility, I would never have been able to realize anything. Imagine Mother talking about humility. And I say I only to make myself understood. But in fact, I means the Lord through this body, this instrument. When you begin living this kind of humility, it means you're drawing nearer to the realization. It is the condition, the starting point. And what is wonderful is that at each moment, the grace, the joy, the light, the love never cease pouring down in the very midst of all this, despite the ego, despite the shame, despite the unworthiness, to be humble. So she's saying, even if you're acting out of the ego and you're creating destruction out of the ego, the grace is still constantly pouring into your life. The love is unconditional. You may shut your doors and you won't feel the rain, but the grace is raining constantly. Okay, so now let's just be quiet. So we feel when things go wrong that life is randomly hitting us. It's doing things to us from which we won't recuperate. But really, life never happens to us randomly. It happens for us. Anything we are calling unfortunate is really work in progress that's happening behind the veils. Everything is so perfectly controlled that we are never given more pain than what's good for our growth. Every drop of pain is perfectly measured. And Mother tells us that every sincere aspiration is heard. While going through difficulty, if I remember these two things, that the difficulty is not against me or randomly hitting me, it's happening for me. And if I aspire to grow through this difficulty, to reach a better place through it, my aspiration will come true. When I live with this, then automatically I'm not caught up in surviving. My constant bid to survive, which generates self-regard or extreme egoism, becomes dim. And I have more energy to give and to really give to people around me, remembering that they are all God, is to live. We discussed a beautiful story where the king declared a reward that whoever treads a highway he had built the best would get a box of gold. People devised various ways to walk on this highway, wearing fancy clothes, running the fastest, going on fancy chariots. All of them came to a pile of rubble over which they stumbled, looked at disdainfully, and walked on. At the end, an old, tired, dirty traveler came huffing and puffing to the king, saying that I found this rubble on the way and I cleared it so that other travelers wouldn't be troubled by it. I found this box below the rubble, and he gave it to the king. The king said, this box of gold is yours because you made the road better for others. He who makes the road better for other fellow travelers travels the road the best. So the king or the Lord, this is his parameter for how we live. How much do we give? And not out of a goody two-shoes attitude of giving. Giving because we are forgetting ourselves. We are remembering the divine presence everywhere, and we are so grateful to it for always having our back, for always making things happen for us rather than to us, that we spontaneously want to give back. When we live an egoistic existence caught up in ourselves, we look for beatitude and praise and flattery. But the mother says that this actually pushes the true beatitude away. The less we look at ourselves, the less we live with self-regard, the more we live with self-giving, the more we remember God instead of ourselves, the happier we'll be, and the better will be the road of life that we are treading. Mother says, the joy in giving is far greater than the joy in receiving, because every time we give forgetting ourselves, our ego drops for a bit and we get a taste of the real self. In that taste is joy. Every time the ego comes to the foreground, the real self retreats. Every time the ego dissolves even momentarily, the self whose fabric is joy comes to the forefront. Hands in a namaste. Let's end with 3 ohms. I'm going to run because I'm